Good afternoon. How's everyone doing? It's been an extraordinary day, very, very empowering, restoring for me. You know, one of the benefits of speaking in the afternoon is you get to hear, right, all the things that folks have been talking about and try to weave it in and connect it from the different workshops and the speakers this morning. One of the things that's been helpful for me is reminders of why I do the work that I do. What keeps me motivated? You know, earlier I was in the workshop regarding self-care for educators and also clinicians, and really thinking about in times where it gets overwhelming and you're burning out or you're experiencing compassion fatigue, how do you connect with self, right? How do you restore self? And I think for many of us in the work that we're doing and also the times that we are living in, it is very important for us to not only remind ourselves of who we are and what keeps us connected and grounded, but also starting to look at how do we empower others? How do we sharpen others? How do we bolster others' experiences in ways that empower and promote advocacy and also promotes autonomy? And that brings me to what I'm going to be focusing on and talking about today. I wear several hats at the university that I'm currently with, which is CSUN, as associate chair, professor, director of our MSW online program, as well as the director of our Minority Male Mentoring and Student Success Allies program, which was started by one of my colleagues, Dr. Alejandra Acuna, back in 2016. And then I took over the program following her. But one of the things that becomes important when we think about the empowering nature of storytelling is how it really uplifts people, but it also uplifts communities, especially communities that are often forgotten, relegated to the margins, that continue to be relegated to the margins. And so being intentional about storytelling becomes very important in the work that we all are doing. And so again, the aim is to really provide you with some ways to think about intentional storytelling to empower others, to empower yourself, and also the communities that you work alongside with. So one of the questions that I have for you is, what's the story you're telling yourself about yourself? What's the story you're telling yourself about today, about yourself? Did we tell ourselves a story before we even came in here of what we wanted to get, or what our goals are, what's our purpose of being here today, what the outcomes are? We are always telling ourselves stories. And what we're learning today and being reminded of today is that there's power in the stories that we tell ourselves and continue to tell ourselves. And so one of the things I want to do with you all is have you engaged in the meaning of your name activity discussion. And it started something, huh? So what I'm going to have you do is you're going to take about 3 minutes. You're just going to partner with the person next to you, and you're going to briefly share the meaning and or significance connected to your name. So were you named after someone? Does your name hold a significant meaning, right? So go ahead and share with the person next to you your name and the meaning behind it or significance connected to it or a story. Let's come on back. What was that experience like for folks? What was that like? You can just yell out things. Fun, hard. When you don't know a meaning behind your name that is one has told you, okay? In the back. Same name. Some similarity, things in common.
It's a conversation opener.
It's a conversation starter, right? It opens it up. What did that feel like to hear somebody else's story? Beautiful. Right? Connected. What was it like to share a little bit about you? Exciting. Felt good. Yeah. These are some of the things that we need to keep in mind when we are creating spaces for folks to not only share their stories, but to be heard, right? To be heard when they are sharing their stories. Especially when we think about, for those of us who are providing services to the communities, the folks that we are working with, right? Are we creating spaces and platforms for folks to share who they are and taking that in the work that we're doing? All right, thank you. Thank you for doing that. So the question that I asked connected to this piece is, do we create and allow for stories to exist in spaces? Do we also allow for multiple stories to exist in the space? Or do we decide which story is true, is most true? So we only create space and visibility for the story that feels most true to who we are. This happens in meetings. This happens in sessions with the folks that we're working with. So I encourage you to think about, do we create spaces for stories to exist, especially when there's different stories that come to the table, right? So intentional storytelling becomes important. Storytelling is communicating ideas, it's communicating beliefs, personal experiences, as well as life lessons using stories or narratives that evoke powerful emotions and insight. Story is the data, right? It's the information. Narratives is the meaning we make of the data, right? Of the different things that we've experienced and encountered. This is also where healing lives. This is also where recovery and wellness lives. How we make meaning of stories of our lived and living experiences. And sometimes we have to be intentional about shifting the narrative around who we are and our experiences. One of the stories that I often share when I talk about not only my clinical practice work, but also my research work, specifically looking at Black men and youth around mental health, grief, and trauma. And what does that look like? How do we understand the traumatic experiences and healing journey of Black men and youth? And so my story around this is when I was 13 years old. And I grew up, I was telling, where's my friend German? There you go. I was telling him earlier, we grew up in North Hollywood. We were sharing our stories at the table. And when I was 13 years old, I was coming home from the mall, the Burbank Mall, and taking the bus. And I was sitting at the bus station, waiting for the next bus to come. And unbeknownst to me, there was a police car circling that corner. After several times of circling, again, didn't realize that they were circling. They pull over. They tell me to put my hands behind my back. And they arrest me. Not knowing what's happening, what's going on, I begin to panic. But something inside of me said, whatever this is, whatever is happening, it's going to be figured out. They got it wrong. We then get down to the police station, North Hollywood Police Station, and get fingerprinted, all the things booked. And then my mom comes. So someone had contacted my mom to let her know that I had been arrested. What I found out is that somebody ID'd me and said that I robbed a restaurant down the street from where I lived at that time. To be told you did something that you know you did not do, not only does that do a special type of psychological wounding, there's a burden that's there psychologically speaking. One of the things that Dr. Sorrell Medina talked about in her breakout session was secrecy. When things happen to folks, you don't want people to know your story because there's shame, there's guilt. Even though I knew I didn't do anything wrong, there was guilt. So before I went back to school, because I was released to my parent, but they said, don't leave, you can't go anywhere, you'll be hearing from us, so on and so forth. Before I went back to school, I knew I had to present a certain way to continue to traverse education and studies. And like many folks, school was a place of safety. Probably that's the reason why I'm still in academia to this day. Feel safe there. But I wasn't good. I wasn't okay. I didn't have language around mental health related symptoms like PTSD and depression about those experiences when the light was in front of my eye, standing at that corner when another police car came around to ID me as a witness. So grades started to drop. My mom didn't call it therapy. She said talking to someone. Do you need to talk to someone? I didn't know what that meant, but I knew it meant help, so I said yes. I need to talk to someone. So they found a therapist for me to go and meet with. And so I walk into that first session with the therapist, and he says, you can have a seat anywhere. And he had a rocking chair in his office, and I was like, I'm about that rocking chair life. So I go to sit in the rocking chair, he said, just not there. So I learned something. You can't believe what people tell you. You can't. That ruptured any possibility of a therapeutic relationship. So I faked good. We had about 3 sessions. We did a conjoint family session, and that was the end of that because I said, I'm good. I'm better. The reason why I'm sharing that story with you, because that's the reason why I'm here today. I knew from that experience, I never wanted anyone else who looked like me to have that same experience receiving services and support from anyone. So I became the social worker, the psychologist, the therapist, the educator, the counselor that I always wished I would have had. So using my traumatic story and turning it into meaning and purpose around how I got here in my journey. This is intentional storytelling and the power of how resiliency really catapults folks into leaning in to who they are. If it wasn't for that experience, I would not be doing the work that I am doing today. Again, do we create spaces for folks' stories to exist? Think about that in the work that you are doing. So, one of the things that storytelling does when you can own it is it empowers you. Also, people resonate with it. One of the things I tell my students is that if nothing else, if you can be genuine and authentic, people will receive that. We may not say the best thing as providers all the time, the right thing, but if we show up with a level of humility and compassion and genuineness, people receive that, and that goes a long way. We know that in empowering folks, it gives them a sense of voice. It allows for their voice to be heard as well. It gives meaning to experiences. And also, it transforms people's lives as well. So thinking about your own stories, are we allowing for transformation in the work that we're doing with ourselves and with the community that you're serving and working with? So storytelling as a tool for empowerment. Stories are not just a means of communication, they are a source of power. When people tell their stories, they reclaim their voices, identities, and also their experiences. Storytelling provides a platform for those who have been silenced or marginalized, allowing them to share their truths and also their experiences. One of the things that we often do is we take people's stories and we share them and we use them in not ways that are always empowering and uplifting. Sometimes we pathologize people's experiences. Sometimes we contribute to the marginalization and oppression of the folks that we work with. I don't think it's conscious. I think it's through our lens, our perspective, sometimes our education, our degrees that are privileged, right? And so we miss things. So one of the things I often say is do not share people's stories unless they give you permission to do so. As we rise up. It's okay. What you can take is what you learned from the stories that you hear. You can take that. You can incorporate that into the work that you're doing day to day. The other question that becomes important is, are we telling stories that are intersectional? We recognize that we are very diverse as humans, right? Our race, gender, ethnicity, culture, gender identity, sexual orientation, all of that. Storytelling is the best tool we have for effectively communicating about big systemic issues like racism, classism, and transphobia. People think in stories. When we don't have a narrative that tells us how to think about an issue, or when the narrative is inaccurate, partial, or too abstract, one of the things that we do is we fill in the gaps. And we create our own stories. And if we are only thinking about folks in these kind of binary identities, you're either this or you're that. What we then simultaneously create is a third space oppression. Because you don't fit into this story, you don't fit into this box, I don't even see you. And because I don't see you, I miss you. And because I miss you, I further pathologize, marginalize who you are. And so we have to think about, are we allowing for, encouraging, promoting, and listening to intersectional stories that go beyond just the binaries of who people are? I think the other piece that becomes important, and I was touching on this earlier, is are we listening? What does it mean to truly listen to someone? Some of us, we think we're listening, but we often interject because we think we're helping. We think we're supporting, we think we're validating. But what we also could be doing is shutting down folks because we're not taking in what they're saying and thinking about how might we use what they're saying to learn, to grow, and show up differently in our own work, in our life. So when we are listening to stories, we are honoring, we are respecting, especially when it's different than your own experiences and truth. We receive it, right? Just because you receive it doesn't mean necessarily you have to agree with it. There are some stories that you don't agree with, fair, but that's their truth. That's their stories. We learn, And then finally, we move different. Gone are the days where folks are sharing and we continue to operate and do business as usual. For those who are doing the day-to-day work with the community, you hear many stories. We are energized by their stories. And also, are we moving differently because of their stories? Are we advocating differently because of their stories? Or are we continuing to practice the same procedures and policies that continue to impact the folks that we're working with? So there's a link, right, when we talk about empowering and advocacy and autonomy and also agency. Storytelling is inherently tied to the concept of agency, advocacy, and also autonomy. When individuals share stories, they assert their agency. They take control of their own narratives. We know that advocacy is born from storytelling when others listen, when they empathize, and also when they join in the fight for justice, as well as equality. Autonomy is then reinforced as individuals and communities use storytelling to define their paths, free from external oppression, and also free from control. So we can't create spaces where folks tell stories, but then we control the story. Then we try to control the narrative. Right? This is what I tell folks is pseudo-inclusion and pseudo-equity. It's this false idea that we want to hear from you, but only if it fits into this box. Or we tokenize folks when we're looking for funding. Tell your story. If that's the only time you're asking for folks to tell their story, that's tokenism, family. Thinking differently about how we're creating spaces and uplifting stories versus using people's stories. So I talked about a moment ago one of the programs that I oversee, the Minority Male Mentoring Program at CSUN, also known as M3 program. And the M3 program was born out of looking at graduation and retention rates at CSUN, but not just CSUN, all of the CSUs, but specifically if we come back to CSUN, looking at the retention and graduation rates of men of color. And one of the things that the university found in their data is that while they were coming and getting admitted to CSUN, they weren't being retained, they weren't matriculating, and ultimately they were not graduating from the university. And so one of the founders of the program decided to develop the M3 program. We also know stigma is real. And we know if we're looking at providing support, mentorship, and social emotional support specifically for men of color, they're not running in at the doors to come in and get that support. So how can we create a platform, if you will, to inspire and motivate them without even having them have to come in to see us? And so what you're seeing behind me is a story, a narrative of one of our former MSW M3 interns, and they share their stories. And these become posters that we put all over the university. And if folks would like some support and mentorship, they can reach out. If not, they don't have to. Think about the stories that have moved you in your life. It's not always the ones where you're going and receiving services the traditional ways in which we see that. Sometimes is what we have watched, is what we have read, is what we have heard. And so this became very powerful as a way to engage and promote and peel back the stigma around telling our stories. And so each individual shared their own stories. The picture before talked about his experience with his sister being diagnosed with leukemia. This gentleman here talks about his experience being born with cerebral palsy and having a ability and the stigma and the shame that got associated with that, and then transforming his own narrative. This individual talks about being queer identified, being indigenous, experiencing homelessness, and how he navigated that. And what we have found is when people hear stories that are proud and loud, it empowers them. It gives them a sense of agency about who they are. It also lets them know you can be here, because imposter syndrome is real. So again, you don't ever have to come to our office to get services, but you may walk by going to your 7 p.m. class on a Tuesday and read one of these stories, and that's something that has kept you connected. And we've also done surveys and heard from folks how they have been inspired by the different types of stories that have been promoted and uplifted. I've had people that I've met on campus, because I have my own story that's posted as well. I've had folks say, I read your story. I appreciate what you shared about your story. It's been helpful. I know you don't know me, right? I just need your signature for something, but I read your story, right? So what I'm bringing this up not just for a model and an example of how we can uplift and promote people's stories, but I'm also trying to move away from the traditional ways in which we think about listening to stories, providing platforms for stories. One of the research graduate capstone project the options that students can do is like qualitative research, and they can do photo voice and video voice, where you allow folks in the community to capture things of what brings purpose and meaning to them versus the researcher studying them, right? So application of storytelling encourages those you serve, whether clients, students, or community members, to tell their stories, create safe spaces where their voices can be heard and validated, use storytelling as a tool in therapeutic settings, classrooms, and community organizations to help individuals reconnect to their agency. And notice the word reconnect to their agency, because it's one of those things that's already there, right? One of my favorite childhood movies is the Wizard of Oz, right? And one of the things that rings true still for me is that you always had it within you. Storytelling, agency, advocacy, you already have it in you. No one's giving it to you. We are respecting and honoring what you already innately have. So when we think about our programs, do we allow for that, to uplift what folks already innately have and what they know to be true? How to foster advocacy through storytelling. 3 things that we can think about. 1, support individuals in finding and sharing their stories within larger movements of social justice. 2, use storytelling in professional settings to highlight the lived experiences of those affected by policies, encouraging others to advocate for changes in said policies. 3, amplify the voices of those who are often unheard by sharing their stories with permission in your own networks and platforms, again, to honor and support. So, as a platform for autonomy, when individuals share their stories, they assert their autonomy by defining who they are, what they value, and how they wish to live their lives. Empower individuals to tell their stories in ways that is true to them when the time feels right for them. Don't force vulnerability. Don't force transparency. Sometimes they're waiting to see how you're showing up on behalf of them to decide if they want to start opening up and sharing their story. And sometimes we have to work through some stuff. We have to address some stuff so that there's a level of trust, especially when we think about communities of color who have experienced distrust from providers. Sometimes they have to see you show up differently and work through some stuff to open up and share their stories. So don't force people to share their stories. Recognize and respect the autonomy of others and how they choose to share or not share their stories. So we're gonna have a table discussion, and there are some questions that I would like for you to discuss at your tables, given what I've been talking about. One, do you currently practice storytelling in your work? Two, whose story do you center? Whose story do you center? Who or what stories do you decenter? And that might not be consciously, it might just be because you're only centering this one story. It could be a population, or it could be a program, etc. 4, what stories might I be missing? And 5, what am I committing to do differently following today around uplifting stories to promote autonomy, agency, and to empower? Okay? So go ahead and discuss these questions at your table, and then we'll wrap it up. How was the table discussion? Some good stuff came up? Yeah? Good stuff came up at the table? What are some of the things that you are committed to doing different following today? What are some of the things you're committing to doing different following today? Listening more, right? So some intentional listening.
Creating more space, like allowing yourself more time to hear the stories.
Creating more space.
You're often so rushed.
Giving more time to hear the story. Pausing, taking it in. Creating more space. Other commitments? Nice. Brought awareness to your own practice, so kind of opening it up, broadening it.
I think asking for permission to use stories, because I know we're going to be working with community, so asking for permission.
Yes, asking for permission to use stories when working in the community and with the community. So celebrating stories, not just presenting on stories when we have to for whatever reason, but also incorporating, celebrating stories so that we're not engaging in tokenism of someone's story or community stories. Not allowing your own stuff to distract you from listening to someone's stories, because it can shut you down, right? From holding the space and listening to stories. So let me close with this. Let us honor the voices of those who have been silenced, and together, let us create a world where everyone's story is valued and everyone's story is heard. Thank you.